Consider today a kick in the shins. Short podcast, 3 mistakes where entrepreneurs leak their energy, it gets in the way, and how to protect it and fix it, all in today's episode. So without further ado, let's get into the show. Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mind of George Show. And yep, today's going to be a little bit different. I have my short shorts on, I got my running shoes on, and we're going to get straight into the topic and we're going to get straight into the podcast. Today, we're going to talk about 3 giant mistakes that entrepreneurs make, or really anybody makes in their life, that overwhelms them and gets in the way of their vision and clarity, and how promptly named this episode is 444, which is an angel number, but more importantly, 44 was my football number, and everything's about synchronicity here and happiness. But I will say that these 3 mistakes are ones that I occasionally still bump up against, and they always create the most critical damage when I make them. But honoring them creates a massive amount of relief. And so before I get into the show really quickly, we've been garnering feedback from all of you. And so get ready, because the podcast is going to have some adjustments coming, including the length of the shows and the takeaways. And so a lot of people have been asking for short, to the point. So our intros are going to be short. We're going to have a short intro of the show. We're going to get right into the meat, including our interviews, where I'm going to just start with the easiest things on the front. But we've also been noticing quite a few things. And one of them is that Spotify podcast is going through the roof and Apple is having some issues. But we are big fans, but primarily if you only listen to the podcast on Apple, I would highly recommend you go to Spotify. We're actually going to be releasing some other things on Spotify, and I've changed my podcast consumption, especially video podcast, to Spotify, because it keeps me focused and there's no other podcasts around. But on Spotify in the future, you're going to be able to ask me voice questions for the podcast and things like that. So we're always going to be on Apple, but Apple's having some very transparent podcast issues, and Spotify, for lack of better terms, is beating their ass. And so for me, no matter where you listen, make sure you're on YouTube, Apple, but also ensure Spotify. So if you haven't subscribed to Spotify, download the app, I promise you. Plus, we have a ton of playlists and things like that we share on Spotify that will only benefit you, that will help if you're making any of these mistakes. So let's get into the show. Okay, so these mistakes are important to understand, because what happens, like in entrepreneurship, our ability to win really comes down to our ability to, in every situation, to triage the entire field in front of us. And then of all the balls that are juggled in the air as an entrepreneur, or snowflakes that are floating in a snow globe, for my analogy, to choose which one in that moment has the best chance or opportunity to get us to our vision or our goal. And in the lens of business and in the lens of life, we wake up every day and make the best plans. And then we get kicked in the shins, or punched in the teeth, or cut off, or we lose a client, or some fire happens, or something happens. And then we lose the ability to be focused in that moment, or triage the entire situation. And most importantly, what it gets in the way of is it gets in the way of the consistency in our needle movers, right? And so what I found with myself is that talking about what I want and what I like and what I'd like my life to look at doesn't quite land as well as using inversion theory and painting the picture of the pain that I've had or experienced or created by noticing the mistakes that I make. And so it's tends to be why I paint the picture the way that I do. But what's really important is I don't actually think that these are mistakes, like, per se. They're more so reminders, right? And so for these are 3 of the biggest ways that I noticed my energy leaked, or, for lack of better terms, these are 3 of the ways in which I found myself, and most of my one-on-one clients and most of my friends, these 3 are actively coming up in the state of the world. And these 3 mistakes, when committed, tended to be the ones that created the most collateral damage, made me feel the most overwhelmed, upset, sad, unclear, scarce, massively reactive, was always on the byproduct or side of one of these. And so really, like, what's the big takeaway? Well, Alex Sharfin, he's a friend of ours. You guys know him from the podcast. If you don't, I highly recommend you go listen to that episode, including the full one. We have a very long one from early on in the show, which we'll link in the show notes. But he says, you don't have the business you want because you haven't become the person to run it, right? And really what this boils down to is protecting our energy, protecting our space, knowing when to be on the field. And I'm going to be using that analogy a lot in the game of entrepreneurship. But to be off the field, since the game might only be an hour a week or an hour a day, and you have to come off the field to audit and adjust, but really it's about protecting your energy and also not allowing all the noise and the distractions and even what feel like flat tires to influence our clarity and decisions, because we have to protect our energy. And it was something that I literally struggled with until the beginning of this year. And it's had the most profound impact on me, my life, my happiness, and most importantly, my revenue and my results because of these three. So what are the three big mistakes that people make? Now, understand these mistakes in painting are in the lens of people allowing things in to tune their radio dial or to take them off the field or to overwhelm them. And these are the three that happen massively. Number one is we say yes impulsively. We say yes impulsively. We will be in the middle of working on a video for our course launch or for our podcast that we're in the flow and in zone. And then we'll see a text or something pop up that asks us a simple question. We'll go do it, and then we'll try to get back on. Well, first off, this has been studied. This is proven. You can Google it. You can find it on an MD article too, where it's proven. When the human brain gets off task, it takes 21 minutes to get back into that task at the level of focus. But this also means saying yes all the time because we have the feeling of like, I have to, or I should do, or my business will lose if this, or if they won't like me for this, or if they won't anything blank, right? There's plenty of examples of this. Or there was a time where I literally said yes to every single podcast and every single keynote, which I still do, but I do it very differently now. Just because I say yes, if the current one doesn't work, it's a yes and I need to adjust it based on my time or schedule. But really, every time I said yes to something, if I wasn't fully clear or completed my needle movers for the day, I was basically just saying no to my vision and no to my best athlete, myself, being in the zone to be able to win that game. And this is why containers are so important and stillness and space is so important. And so one of the things that I've told myself for a long time, and this is because Alex Sharfin also says, if you're constantly fighting fires in your business, there's a good chance you're the arsonist. Is I say to myself right now that the only pain that I have is the pain that I can create, the pain that I create. And so it's understanding that instead of saying yes impulsively or allowing our energy to be detracted or distracted from what we're focusing on, is that number one, when we're working on a needle mover or working on ourselves or working in our business, we need to be present. And maybe we use the Pomodoro technique and go 10 minutes in or 20 minutes in with a 10-minute break, but we need to be focused. But then also, when we're thinking about operating in life or business or entrepreneurship, every time somebody asks for a meeting or a call or a podcast or a thing for you, you also have to be able to pause and filter that against, okay, is this one of my needle movers? Is this something that's going to move the needle in my business? And if you can't do that or don't do that, you're almost guaranteed to be overwhelmed and feel pain. And clarity is something that I also didn't have for a long time. And this is why we opened the Relationship Speed Algorithms Alliance, which if you don't know anything about and you want to read the info and watch the video of me, it is basically my former mastermind coming back to build my legacy project, which means I'm in the weeds with all of you like 3 times a week in Telegram and on Zoom calls, helping you with mindset, relationships, and customer journey, but also showing you how I do it and operate every day, and a lot of our friends and other people that are in. So if you want to know more about that, shoot me a DM on Instagram. It's George Bryant with the words RBAA, and it's open enrollment, and it's less than a cup of coffee a month. But let me tell you this right now, it is not to convince you, it is to invite you. If you are a heck yes or a hell yes, love to have you. If you're on the fence, keep with the podcast until you're a hell yes, okay? So number one mistake is we say yes impulsively. We don't filter it through either our emotional state, filter it through the needle movers in our business or the priorities in our business. And we end up saying yes to everybody else's vision and saying no to ours. Number two, the second mistake is we take the open door policy too literally. And I want to read the note from Ashley. I like this one. Too many entrepreneurs misinterpret an open door policy as an obligation to be available to their team or customers every minute of every day. And so, an example for me is there was a time where I had clients in Slack, Facebook Messenger, Voxer, email, and Instagram DMs, and occasionally my text messages. And I had messages coming in from all over the places all the time the moment I went online. Like, hey, you there? Hey, you here? Hey, you there? I also had this overwhelming feeling of guilt all the time that I had to be available 24/7, 365. And trust me, that is a guaranteed recipe for failure. And so, number one is we have to understand that we have to protect our energy. We have to protect our time on the field. We have to protect our capacity and know when to use it or when not to use it, right? But when we're the authority, when we're the leader, we're also the dictator of the container. And so now for me, what that looks like is that my phone stays in do not disturb mode until 9 a.m., which means that's when I'm at my office. I've already done my workout. I've done my stillness. I've done my steps. I've done my family. I've done my state of being. And then every one of those notifications that is now very, very intentionally put into a bucket, and some of them are independent. One client is messages, but we have rules there. One is Voxer, but we have rules there. My team is in one container, but also the expectation has been set. And so then as soon as 9 a.m. hits, I'm done. I've done my needle movers. I have my clarity. And I'm like, great, now I've earned the right to respond to the world because my vision was protected first. And so then I undo that notification and I chunk it down piece by piece, right? So number two is we take an open door policy literally, which just translates to we don't protect our time. We don't protect our energy, and then we create a game that's massively overwhelming. And so we have to be focused, we have to control the containers, and we have to have clarity to do that. And then the third thing, and this one lends in very, very, very close to the other one, is we respond to emails, text messages, or anything straight away. Literally, I remember doing this, and I would be in my inbox, and no matter what task I was working on, I would just have it open. And if something came in, I didn't want it in my inbox, so I would handle it, take it out of my inbox, and then try to get back on task. And then it took me years until I went to, I'm just going to ignore my inbox for 30 days at a time, which is my flavor now, and then go attack it when I want to. But there's many, many flavors of this, right? And so if we're hyper vigilant and hyper aware that an email is going to come in and we're even thinking about it, we're not focused and we're not on task. But we also have to remember that it's just a distraction. We have to understand that instead of regularly getting pulled away from everybody else's directions and pings and requests, we have to choose to create our day or our schedule or our buckets to be able to hit our required needle movers, and your inbox might be one of them, but to be done on your terms and your time that creates the most space. And what I love is even my CEO, Ashley, sometimes she'll still do copywriting projects and other stuff on the side. But even when she was just in my mastermind, I would love it. I would shoot her an email and it would get a response back instantly that was automated that said she only checks her email, I think 3 times a week at these times. And so this is when to expect to hear a response. And I was like, fuck yeah, girl, go. And I was like, God, I need to be better about my containers. But it's really about protecting our energy and protecting our focus when we only have a peak zone every day or a certain amount of time where we operate at our best, and not allowing the world, to lack of better terms, leak that energy out and get in the way. And so we have to be really, really tight on containers. But also one of those is thinking that we have to be available 24/7. And instead we have to think about intentionally designing our day and our communication channels in containers that hold these things tight, right? And so for me, these are 3 of the biggest ones that I see happen all the time, and they create overwhelm, they can create anxiety, they can create scarcity, and then it just boils and it bubbles. And then the longer we're in it, the more evidence that comes in, it almost makes it harder and harder. And this all boils down to self-regulation, for lack of better terms, right? And the analogy that I'm going to be using a ton is working on the player off of the field, right? And so there's us when we're on the field and executing a play, but when the ball goes down and we get triggered, we have to get off the field and we have to not go back on until we're ready, but we have to be able to protect our containers and know kind of what supports us. But one of the things that I've noticed, and this has rung true for me for 15 years when I think about it in hindsight, and this rings true for me for all my clients, my coaches, my mentors, my business partners. And it's something I don't take lightly when I say, but I said this to myself and it made me feel so much better and so empowered. And it's one of my scripture statements. And I said that anxiety is energy lacking intention and clarity. It just needs a place to go. And that has not rung true for me more than now. And it is 100% accurate at any single moment that I can think about where I was in breakdown, where I was in overwhelm, where I had scarcity. It was because I didn't go look at the account, or I wasn't willing to sit and analyze what was coming in and what was going out, or when I couldn't figure out why the offer didn't convert, I wasn't willing to go ask questions and look for feedback, right? There was this massive overwhelming amount of anxiety, but it really was just lacking a place to go. And so thinking about these 3 mistakes, they're not really mistakes. They're things to be aware of. They're places where we leak our energy, we leak our power, and we leak our ability to perform as the player on the field, right? And so how do we protect these? Number 1 is clarity. Number 2 is your wedge of expectations. And number 3 is your SOS to get your ass back on the field in case something happens. And so we will link to those podcasts below. And so number 1 is you have to have clarity to measure against. So when these things happen, you're creating containers around your vision, your goals, and your needle movers. Number 2 is if something gets in the way and doesn't get you to remember those, it doesn't mean you have to leak all the way down this bucket. It means you have to remember what you're focused on, remove the emotion, remove the clarity, and get back on the field to execute and earn your right to handle it. And so I'd highly recommend you take a look, you check containers, you do an audit, and do an audit in your mindset, your body, and your state of being, and your business, which is what we help you do in the Alliance. We have you do a current state audit, which is just a drop I did the other day, and then a clarity vision, and then build the bridge between it, and then build your wedge so you have this, right? And so, like I said, just shoot me a message on Instagram. It says RBAA. It's only $100 a month, but it's not a come in and go. It's a come in and I want you to be in Alliance forever because I'm not closing this thing. And that's my current belief. So that's what we're sticking with. But then we have to protect our energy. And then when we find these triggers, when we find these leaks, if it's one of the 3 on this list or another one that you have pinging in your brain right now, that the moment we find them, we audit it, and then we build containers in place in our life to protect these, to mitigate them from happening again, so we can stay in that clear state, that thrive state, that operational state, or on the field, not tending to an injury or 911. And so that's what I got for today's show. And I don't even think we're going to be putting outros on the show anymore. We're going to be doing, I'll see you in the next episode, because nobody sticks around for that anyways. But I love you. I want you to most importantly remember that relationships will always beat algorithms. Hit a few things in this episode, a couple of podcast episodes linked below, the wedge of expectations, which will help you put your habits in to remember when you're overwhelmed, the SOS, which will help you get back on the field if you don't have a support system and help you remember that clarity, and then the 3 mistakes today to kind of avoid. And so my invitation is, if anything I've ever said to you is helpful on this podcast, if you like these things, if you like this content, if you want to be in a group of people in Alliance that's all supported to you, please come join us on RBAA, because it is going to be the mecca of all us pouring into each other. We're on Telegram. We do Zoom calls every month, and I have a ton of bonuses dropped in. So that's the last thing. So shoot us a DM on Instagram with RBAA. And then most importantly, Spotify. We're going to be talking about this a ton, because I'm going to be utilizing Spotify to better support you guys, answer questions, be able to hear them, have you guys give feedback. And that's where I'm consuming video now. That's where I'm consuming video podcasts, and we're going to keep uploading the videos over there too. So YouTube will still go, Apple will still go, they'll all still go, but I recommend everybody migrating over to Spotify. So that's what I have for today's episode. We did it, 17 minutes. My goal is to keep them all under 20, and we unpacked a lot in this one. So I'll work on keeping them shorter, keeping them briefer, and making sure they're actionable and takeaway for you. And if you have any feedback, please, it's an open door. I love reading it. So I love you. You ain't got to leave. You can go to another episode, which I'd recommend. But before you do, go put this into practice. So I'll either see you guys in the next episode, or you'll hear me in your earballs. So make sure you're subscribed. If you haven't left a review, please make sure you do it. But either way, we out. I'm going to go run my short shorts and pink shoes in the snow. Bye.